Gatorade or Powerade? It's an age-old decision that every athlete has to make, and of course everybody has their own flavor preferences, but which one is better and why should I choose one over the other? In today's video, I'm going to be giving you the information of how you can decide which one is better, or if you don't like these altogether, you can apply this information to any sports drink out there, and then you can find what's good, what's too much, what's not enough, and that way you can make the best decision for you for whatever activity that you're doing. And at the end of the video, I'll show you a little bit of the deceptive tactics that sports drinks use to fool you into thinking that they're healthier or better for you than they actually are. The first strategy I want to go over when we're talking about hydrating our bodies and keeping our bodies hydrated during intense physical activity is understanding what happens when our body sweats. When we sweat, we lose three things. We lose water, we lose sodium, and we lose carb. The reason why water isn't the best hydrator for you whenever you're doing intense physical activity is because water alone just replenishes one of these three things. And you don't want to be losing three and just replenishing one. That's eventually, the longer you go, the lower your effectiveness in your sport, the effectiveness in your activity, the lower you'll be able to perform the longer you go. So the more you replenish three when you're losing three, the best it's going to be for you. Now, to those of you that see that I didn't put electrolytes on here, if you've been in the sports space for any amount of time, they'll tell you get electrolytes. Well, yes, that is true. I'm not saying it's not true. However, keep in mind, electrolytes is just salt. Salt is a compound of sodium and chloride. The second reason is because sodium is what's going to be on your nutrition label. So I wanted to use the term that you're going to see actually on your nutrition labels. That way you can calculate what you need to even quicker and easier for you. Now, if you want me to go in depth of how like sodium, salt, electrolytes, all that, how it affects hydration in the body, leave it down in the comments below. Speaking of nutrition labels, if you look at nutrition labels and you look at the food we commonly eat, sodium and carb is in everything. Well, just about everything. I mean, look on there. You'll see that these two things are almost always present in all the things that we eat, or at least all the packaged goods that we get. So I want to give you the percentages, or I guess the better term for it would be measurements. So I'm just going to keep percentages since I wrote this down. You'll want to know the percentages of what sodium and carb in your beverages and what is good for you when you're working out. So when it comes to carb, you'll want 6 to 7% carb in your beverage, in your solution. And the second thing you'll want about 100 to 200 milligrams of sodium per 240 milliliters of liquid. 240 milliliters is just 1 cup. So first off, we have 6 to 7% carb in your solution. And then the next is 100 to 200 milligrams of sodium per 240 milliliters of liquid. So in a second, I'm going to give you the exact calculations of how you find if it is 6 to 7% or how many milligrams of sodium it is. Now let's find out how we actually calculate to see if our drink meets the criteria that we need. So the first one we're going to do is calculate how many carbs we have. So we need 6 to 7% carb in our drink. And our example beverage is 20 fluid ounces or 591 milliliters, has 35 grams of carbs in it, and has 250 milligrams of sodium. So the steps we do is step number 1, convert your ounces into grams. And you'll need to do that because you'll need to divide by 35 grams. And then you'll divide that grams of carb by the grams of fluid that's in there. And in step number 3 is the number you get from that, you'll times it by 100, and that'll give you your percentage. So let's see what that looks like. So first off, step number 1 is convert our ounces into grams. 567 grams. So 20 fluid ounces is 567 grams of fluid. The way you calculate that is remembering that 1 ounce is 28.34 grams. So all you do in order to find how many grams you have, you take 28.34, times it by your ounces, and that gives you your grams. And then we can move on to step 2. Step 2 is divide grams of carb by your grams of fluid. Divide by 567 grams equals 0.062. Now, one thing you need to remember is this number And this number, I've already rounded to make it, more manageable numbers. Both this one and this one have a bunch of numbers behind it, but I think both of these I rounded up. I can't quite remember. But now that we have our number, we times that by 100, and if you think you know what the answer is going to be, what the percentage is going to be, put it down in the comments below. So 0.062 times 100 equals 6.2%. Did you get it? I hope so. So now that we know what percentage our example beverage is, we know 6.2% is within that range right there. And as a little side note, if you're wondering why it's so seemingly so close together, 6 to 7%, is studies show that anything like 8% or above can be a little too much for your system to handle during your intense activity, and it can actually delay the gastric emptying time and cause like intestinal distress and make you feel more sluggish, make you feel slower, like you're performing less, and it just kind of weighs you down. So the 6 to 7%, studies have shown that is a good percentage to fuel you up for what you need and keep you going and not weigh you down. Next, we're going to calculate how much sodium is in our example bottle. Again, we need 100 to 200 milligrams per 240 milliliters. And how we find that out is a little bit simpler than carb. So first off, we'll divide the milligrams of sodium by the milliliters in the bottle. Once we have that number, we'll times that by 240 milliliters. So step number one is divide milligrams, which is 250. So we'll divide that by 591 milliliters, which will give us a number of 0.42. So now that tells us how many milligrams of sodium is in a single milliliter. If whatever bottle you're trying to choose, or whichever one you want to decide, if the bottle you're trying to choose, or the drink you want to choose, doesn't have milliliters in it, you can just do the calculation yourself, because 1 ounce equals 29.57 milliliters. So you just take your 29.57, times it by how many fluid ounces is in the bottle, and that will give you how many milliliters you have. So now that we've done step one, we've divided milligrams by milliliters, we times that number by 240, so 0.42 times 240 milliliters equals 100.8 milligrams of sodium. So now that 100.8, or let's say let's round up to 101, so now that 101 milligrams of sodium is definitely within that range that we're trying, sorry. So that number is definitely within the range that we're trying to calculate and trying to figure out. So now we have our carb calculation, excuse me. So now we have our carb calculation, we have our sodium calculation. Now how does this stack up to Gatorade and Powerade? Considering our criteria, Gatorade has 6.3% carb solution in it. We're definitely within our 6 to 7, and it has 110 milligrams of sodium per milliliter. Powerade, on the other hand, has 6.2% and 101 milligrams of sodium. So as you can tell, both are pretty dang close. And the way I would break it down, the way I would suggest to you is I would say choose Powerade. It's got less carb in it, it's got less sodium, which it still gives you great amounts of what you need, but it's not quite as much, it's not quite as much for your body to process as the Gatorade. Now, you might be looking at this and say, well, isn't more better? In some instances, that's true. If the weather is a little bit warmer, if it's a little bit hotter outside or humid, I would say go with a Gatorade because of the added milligrams of sodium. It's going to be a little bit better because your body's going to be perspiring a lot more in hotter weathers. So I would say, go for Gatorade for the more, milligrams of sodium in it. But as a general rule, I would always suggest Powerade. So finally, the last thing I want to stress to you is something that I said at the very beginning of the video is if your exercise is an hour or less, water should be the only thing you're reaching for. Water should be your go-to. Your only thought should be get a water because that's all you need. If your activity is 2 hours or longer, like a long hike, a marathon, like I said, if you're an athlete and you go to whatever practice you're going to, that's when you might think about a sports beverage. But the sneaky thing that sports beverages often do is, if you look at their nutrition label, it might say, this many calories, this many milligrams of sodium, this many grams of carb. But what you need to look deeper in is the information that nutrition label gives you is per serving. But if you look on a little bit deeper on the bottle, you'll see that the whole bottle has 2.5 servings. So if it says 15 grams of carb on there, you might be getting excited like, oh, it's only 15 grams of carbs. But if there's 2.5 servings, you could be getting 30 or upwards of 40 grams of carbs per drink. That's why I want to stress that unless you're doing intense physical activity for multiple, hours or even more than an hour, your water should be your only go-to, because this is packing on a lot of sugar that you don't need, and then if you're not using it, your body's going to ingest that sugar and just store it as fat, and that's something that you don't want. But these should only be considered if you're going to burn energy and you need something to supply a little bit, so that way you can keep burning it and keep performing at a high level. Now, if you've watched this whole video and you still insist on choosing either Gatorade or Powerade, and you're like, man, I don't care about the numbers, I just care about flavor, then choose Powerade. White cherry is the best. Thank you so much for watching my video today. If you enjoyed the video and you learned something new, leave a like on this video. If you like the whiteboard and you want to see more of it, or you have any questions whatsoever, leave all that down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.